Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. A reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. I'm your host, William Liu. And given that this is Tuesday, I am joined by Sportsnet's Blake Murphy, producer.
Blake Murphy.
What's going on, Blake? Do you have the other producers play this drop when you are on the morning show on Jay's Talk Plus, which is coming up right after this, and also today on the Fan Drive Time?
I don't.
Will be at 5 o'clock.
It would be weird to have it on my own show.
Why not?
If I branded it as Blake Murphy Tuesdays, it's supposed to be Blake Murphy every day on Jay's Talk Plus. No, the morning show doesn't give me anything other than generally the first 5 minutes of the segment is complaining that I don't have to wake up early anymore. Yeah.
Don't you love it, though?
That's how that one goes.
I'm
still doing the morning show with them every morning, so it's not like I'm sleeping until like 9 o'clock, but the difference between 5 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. is monstrous.
I was going to say, how's your standard of living improved?
It's only been a week, so, but yes, it's gone up.
No, it's good, man. No, you look bright, shiny. There's less eye bags. Actually, almost none, actually. It looks like you got some good sleep last night, even though the Jays played
super
past
late.
Midnight?
Yeah, the game got delayed for 2 hours. So
rain delay?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I came in soaking wet today.
Right.
To just fit the vibe for the Jays show later.
No, listen, we might have to save a little bit of time for the Jays because I'm back in. I'm back in. I'm a very, very casual fair weather fan. But when I see things like 8 in a row, then I see a game where they win 8-0 and see some 29-year-old who went to Mexico and came back and made his pro debut and his family's in the crowd and he gets a 1-2-3 inning. I'm like, okay, all right. Couple of storylines here. But look, first we're going to talk about the Toronto Raptors. The most topical thing with the Raptors, honestly, is nothing because there's not much happening aside from Scotty Barnes going down to Media Day between games 2 and 3 down in Boston. Scotty Barnes is cosplaying a reporter, which honestly I think he would do very well as a reporter if he decided to go in that route. But he's also going to make maybe $300 million in his career, so maybe don't be a reporter. But
here's the thing about reporting skill. There are a few ways to be a good interviewer, a good reporter. One of them is having just that kind of natural charm about you that warms people up and opens people up. And if you heard any of the Raptors talk about Scotty Barnes during the course of this year, you know that he has that. Like when even Fred is begrudgingly being like, yeah, you get used to it. Like that's the most open Fred is going to be about something like that. So I could see it. I could see Scotty Barnes. He starts to have a conversation with someone. A minute in, you think it's like a blow off conversation. And then by like minute 7, you're telling Scotty Barnes your life story.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, first off, Fred is perhaps the most outwardly old 28-year-old you'll ever see. Somehow he's an old head, despite being born in 1994. So that doesn't feel right, personally. But the other part is just, I mean, if we're going to compare Scotty to a reporter, who is the Scotty Barnes of the media world, if there is one?
I don't think there's a good comp. I don't think any sports reporter has that level of happiness and energy. And if they do, it's probably not the people that also have the talent that like Scotty Barnes gets away with that in part because he's so good and you have to have patience with him. I don't know. I don't know if that person exists in sports media.
I was going to say Cabby. A little bit like Cabby. You know how Cabby invades your space and throws you off and you're media trained, but no one really media trains you for what Cabby is going to say to you. And
that's a good one.
Getting you to open up.
Especially peak like Cabby on the street Cabby.
Oh, yeah.
Cabby now, he just gets you to open up your wallet.
Cabby invaded me, backstage here at the studio on the Jays home opener. I believe they were playing the A's, I think. The Oakland A's, and he was like, "Yo, quickly, who's your pick?" And I was like, "I'm the Raptors guy, but I'm gonna go pick the Blue Jays." I'm not the person really to come to for betting advice. But anyway, look, we're not gonna talk about that because look, even though there's not much like topically happening with the Raptors, I think the most topical thing with the Raptors is sort of what they might do with the draft.
Yeah,
and I wanted to go through their draft history, and this is something that I've done in previous podcasts, before it was the Raptors Show, when it was Raptors of Everything, or even at Raps Republic, it was like this exercise before the draft was sort of like looking at this front office and seeing what trends sort of appear based on the results of their previous picks and trying to use some of those patterns to try to predict what they may do with the 33rd pick overall this year. So I'm going to quickly go over it. Since Masai and Bobby took over the front office in 2013, the Raptors have made 13 draft picks directly, as well as trading for Norman Powell, who was taken 46 overall in 2015 by the Bucks on draft night, but the Bucks traded him to Toronto. I think the Raptors made that pick on behalf of Milwaukee, or Milwaukee made that pick on behalf of Toronto as part of that trade. I can go through the list. It's not that long of a list. 2021, they drafted Scotty Barnes 4th overall, Delano Banton 46th, David Johnson 47th. In 2020, they drafted Malachi Flynn, 29th, Jalen Harris, 59th. 2019, 59th, they took Juan Hernandez. 2017, they took OG Anunoby, 23rd overall. 2016, Jakob Poeltl with the 9th pick. 2016, Pascal Siakam with the 27th pick. Fred VanVleet also goes undrafted in this draft. I really consider him the 61st pick, but unfortunately he's undrafted. That's really the key to his story here. DeLon Wright, 2015, 20th overall pick. Norm Powell at 46 in the same draft. And then 2014, just a big swing and a miss. But Bruno Caboclo, 20th overall. DeAndre Daniels, 37th overall. And Xavier Thames, 59th overall in 2014. So looking at this list, I think the one thing that definitely stands out to me is, in terms of patterns that the Raptors have had under this front office in the draft, is like, I think it's very clear that the Raptors are not adverse to players with some college experience. And if anything, I might even think that they actually prefer having a little bit more data on sort of how these players are going to turn out. And yeah, I mean, first off, I have some research on this as well, but do you first off see the same pattern? And also, if so, like why? And, is that a good approach, et cetera, et cetera?
It's a tough one because that is more data, and theoretically those players are more projectable. You know more about them and who they are.
Yep.
But at the same time, most models devalue seniors or overexperienced players because there is a real component of a 22-year-old going up against 18-year-olds in college basketball gives you, like, that's not a very high fidelity sample to evaluate that guy. He's in his 3rd or 4th year playing against a younger guy. He's those are obviously very important years in terms of physical maturity. Sometimes guys buck that. DeLon Wright was someone I remember was very high on their list from the analytics department. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. Obviously, Fred VanVleet was another one who 4 years. Norman Powell was a 4-year guy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be one, and that's the big thing from all this is, like, we say that guys are Raptorsy or they have a certain way, but there's not really one uniform type of guy they look for. OG Anunoby was not a senior. Pascal Siakam was not a senior and was very inexperienced by the standards of high-level basketball. So they do kind of go all over the place. I think one of the things that they weigh heavily, and this is why they might lean towards seniors, is you also have a better handle on the person at that point. I think a 21-year-old or a 22-year-old is just there's more, you get a better read on what they're like, what their work habits are going to be like. I know one of the things that some teams test for is there are personality tests and stuff or psychological tests that can tell you, okay, hey, you get drafted in this spot and you get drafted onto a good team. So your minutes aren't there right away. And you might have to sit on the bench and you might have to, focus on your own grind in practice or go to the G League. Not all personality types are going to handle that the same way. You get drafted to a bad team where there's not as much structure in terms of offensive discipline, say. Some guys are going to thrive in that situation and learn how to play winning basketball within that. Some guys aren't. And that's kind of, the brain is kind of the black box when it comes to drafting. But I do think the Raptors put a pretty high premium on quality of person and their ability to not project necessarily, but take an educated guess at how well does this guy fit the culture. And a big part of that culture is you might have to motivate your own grind to use a Norm Powell term. You can't get down and you can't pout if you're not in the rotation because you're getting drafted to a winning environment. And that's not for everyone. And I think that's where older players tend to have a little more polish to them in terms of maybe it doesn't work out that way. in practice, but I think those guys at least know how to present themselves that way and can show, obviously sometimes with 4-year guys too, you get the DeLon Wright or Fred VanVleet or Norman Powell path of like, you got it out the mud, right? Like it's like you weren't a top prospect. You didn't go, Norm went to a big program, but he rode the bench for 2 years. DeLon Wright had to go the community college route first. Fred VanVleet went to a small school and didn't have a lot of offers, all those things. So I think that the fact that seniors or overage prospects tend to have stories like that as well draws the Raptors to them personality-wise, if not necessarily play-wise. Now, there's also the argument that, seniors more ready to contribute on a short timeline, but I don't think that's a huge thing because if we're being realistic, especially with only the second-round pick this year, you shouldn't be putting in pencil most rookies to play a meaningful role right away. It doesn't happen a lot. Scotty Barnes is the exception. OG Anunoby is the exception. Pascal Siakam had to go back down to the G League after trying it out. Fred VanVleet barely played as a rookie. So even the guys who work out don't always hit the ground running.
Yeah, no, that's fair. No, that was going to be the follow-up question is just like, I think perhaps this is also a function of like, the Raptors have been very competitive. Just ever since Masai and Bobby took over, only missed the playoffs that 1 year in Tampa, which doesn't even really count. So perhaps some of the thinking could be, I was going to ask you, I guess, is sort of thinking whether they can contribute right away. But even though some guys have, even like a Delano, for example, was in the rotation, at least at the start of the season and stuff like that. Like, I think generally speaking, the strategy of depending on rookies to contribute for you, especially if you are, going to the playoffs, if you are intending to go deep into the playoffs, that is a little bit shaky.
I would say too, that's probably a spot where there's a little bit of disconnect between coaching staff and front office. I'm not like reporting that. I could just see it where
that makes sense.
Nick Nurse probably looks at the list here and immediately looks at 3-point percentage and 3-point volume on that list, right? Like, what does this team need short term? Whereas I think the approach that Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster have tended to take, and this again, it doesn't hold for every pick, but it's the question of, there are two questions, right? Does this guy help you win more games now? Which for most rookies is going to be no. And even in the case of Delano Banton, I think that probably, like him playing small rotation minutes to start the year instead of being in the G League, probably disrupted the path that he was on. Obviously, he's in a good place still. But though he could have been playing 40 minutes a game instead of 8 or 10 minutes a game. The other question is, can we develop this player into someone who wins us games later? And I think that's the question that the Raptors have focused on more. And, Masai always talks in terms of championships, right? Like, and Bobby Webster did this at the trade deadline too, of, well, do you make a move because it helps you win an extra 2 games right now, but it doesn't move your championship needle at all? And I think they've taken that approach more often than not to the draft where, hey, Delano Banton, yeah, maybe he could have played a 10th man role all last year, but if they develop him right, maybe he could be a 6th man. Whereas another pick maybe is a surefire, more certain than Delano Banton to play a backup role, but less upside there. So I think that those are the kind of things that they look at there more so than how much can this guy play right now.
No, that's fair. And I think, honestly, part of that comes down to sort of like this style of player that they've drafted, which I'm going to actually get to that part as well. I think the last thing with me, just like the age point, is like, do you think this is also a function of the fact that the Raptors have been very successful, which means, generally speaking, if you're a successful team, you're going to draft later in the draft, unless you have made some other picks, right? Obviously, the Raptors were able to get the 9th pick overall and take Jakob Poeltl, despite, being a playoff team, because of the Andrea Bargnani trade. You've had other instances. Obviously, they tanked that 1 year and they got Scotty, which was great. But generally speaking, you're going to be picking later in the draft. And later in the draft, I mean, I guess there's like 2 strategies. You either take a complete swing on a freshman who probably had a down year, and so therefore their stock went down, but maybe coming out of high school they had a really high ranking, or you go with something more dependable, which is like usually some players who have played a lot more in college. You think that's also a factor in the age?
I do think it is. And, when we're talking about floor versus ceiling, the guys at the top of the draft are always going to have a completely different equation, right?
Definitely.
There aren't a lot of years where like Tari Eason is going to go 20th overall and has the same profile as a top 5 pick. Like that doesn't happen super often. OG Anunoby shouldn't have slid the way he slid, but he had injury concerns and a lot of teams weren't comfortable with that. So yes, I think it's definitely a product of where you pick as well. And you have to embrace being creative and thinking outside of the NCAA to NBA pipeline a little bit too with those picks where, Pascal Siakam wasn't a nobody in college, but he was a little bit of an odd pick as a first rounder, as someone who was primarily back to the basket in a smaller conference with a ton of volume, and who knew how that would translate. You look at what the Spurs did during their dynasty years, and some of those are just good picks, but a lot of that too is looking outside the box, beating other teams to international markets that the NBA scouts weren't traditionally in, finding the Ginobilis and Parkers and stuff like that at good value. So there are a few ways to come at it, and I think it's just, if you have top picks, that's a competitive advantage. If you have lower picks, you got to find a different edge. And a lot of times that's Makes either sense. Your scouting or your approach thing, and really your developmental philosophy. I think this far into this front office too, one of the biggest things they're probably trying to measure pre-draft is developmental capacity, I guess you'd call it, which is, okay, we know what the ceiling is and we know what the floor is. What are the chances they reach the ceiling? Because some guys don't have that developmental capacity. They won't do well in the G League. They won't, do well kind of left on their own to work on their game and stuff like that.
You talking about Bruno?
Pardon?
Basically, you're saying Bruno.
Honestly, I'll name a name. It's the Deontay Davis corollary is what I call it now in my draft article. So the year that they took Jakob Poeltl 9 and Pascal Siakam 27, that if for those who don't remember, that was the top 8 year. Everyone knew who the top 8 guys were going to be. That was the Jaylen Brown, Marquise Chris draft. Like, everyone knew who was off the board at 8, and there was one tiny rumor that Jaylen Brown might slide, and otherwise, as Raptors people, we were looking at everyone 9 down. And Deontay Davis was a guy that I liked. The athleticism was crazy. He fit.
Him and Scout were the two who kept falling, and people were like, "Just take him. You have 27 overall. Just take him."
Yeah.
Now, of course, they took Pascal, which was probably the best player in that draft. But
this is where I know what you're doing with that.
No, I mean, hey,
we could talk finals a different time, but no. So what that kind of taught me, and I don't mean to pick on Deontay Davis, but he bounced around a little bit. Teams kind of gave up on him quickly. He went to the G League and put up good numbers, but like it's the Christian Wood thing too, where Christian Wood, it took him like 3 years of putting up bonkers numbers in the G League to stick in the NBA. And whenever that's happening over and over again, and a guy has all the tools, like NBA teams love tools. If you have all the tools and you're sliding down draft boards,
there's
something's up.
There's something,
and in some cases that's injury. In some cases it's agent stuff. In some cases it's, well, all the tools are there, but you don't have confidence that you're going to be able to develop them. And that's kind of that's another, I said the brain is kind of the black box of drafting, and that's where some teams are, try to chip away at that a little bit. And so I call that the Deontay Davis corollary, because it's like, it's not that he was like a traditional bust because he got drafted so late, but he just, he never put it together more than putting up numbers in the G League.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I think look, the drafting is very, very nebulous, but it's also so many components sort of factor in, and it's very interesting to pick apart all these components. I think the other part too, speaking to the tools, is like, with the Raptors, this was more true, I think, in previous years' drafts, and it's been interesting, and I wanted your thoughts on this. But generally speaking, the Raptors, like most teams, really value wingspan, really value size. If anything, they have a size bias. Like, for a while, the smallest player they drafted was Norm, who is 6'4" and has a 6'10", 6'11" wingspan. Like, that's not really small, right? I mean, like, it was like past that it was DeLon Wright, who's big for a guard. When you look at, like,
and DeLon's taller than Norm.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And when you look at, like, their wingspans and everything like that, I mean, the differential between obviously your height and your wingspan, Scotty Barnes, for example, is a +6. Norm's a +6. OG's a +6. Pascal's a +5, right? By the way, you remember what Bruno's differential was?
+8, I want to say.
He's +10.
Whew.
I just looked this up again. 6'9", 7'7" wingspan. So he's +10. Anyway, so there was a clear wingspan bias, but I feel like in at least the last 2 drafts alone, there's been some more exceptions. First off, like, you got Malachi, you got Jalen Harris, both guys who are small guards, no significant wingspan to speak of. Malachi by far is the smallest player the Raptors have taken with a first round pick. And then I guess you got David Johnson in the second round. Now, of course, that could be skewed because, Jalen was 59 and David was 47th, and didn't really seem like they had that many plans to play him this year. But do you see the Raptors moving away from that, or is this sort of just like, I mean, they also took Delano and Scotty?
I think you have to take some shots outside of your comfort zone in the draft sometimes too, especially years you have 2 picks, or, you know, the Jalen Harris year where you have 59 and you know you're going to get a couple undrafted free agents too. That happened the DeJuan Hernandez year as well, where they technically end up with, I think they end up with 4 guys: O'Shea Brissett, Shamori Pons, DeJuan Hernandez, and Terrence Davis were all names that they were considering at 59. And then they end up with all of them at one point. So that's a consideration as well. But I think there's something to getting outside of, you know, you hit on, obviously if something works for you, you know how to develop these longer forwards and build playmaking skill and build some ball handling and get them to defend within your system. The real test of your developmental system, the next test rather, is can you take a different style of player and get more out of them? And I think what you've seen with the Harris, Johnson, and Flynn picks is an attempt to see if they can take what are more natural offensive packages and develop those players that don't have maybe the same athletic or physical advantages, but they have a more natural or at least more established offensive approach. And some of that is just probably, hey, let's see what else we can develop. Some of it is, well, if you know you can turn every Justin Champagny into a rotation player, but year over year, you're struggling, like Terrence Davis becomes an important player for you because no one else can put any pressure on the rim or create a shot for themselves. Like then it becomes, well, maybe it's worth, you know, all of these are low probability flyers at that point, but maybe it's worth putting more in that basket. Because you need one of those to click and you haven't had one click for you really.
Well, no, that's honestly, that is, that does make a lot of sense. Especially because I think also when you look at the results of the draft, again, like the more recent examples are different, but overall, like there just seems to be, the Raptors haven't emphasized like drafting a ready-made shooter. Like I in fact, I really struggle to think about it. It's not like these guys didn't hit threes before the Raptors, like, but the 3-point attempt rates were fairly low. Like OJ Anunoby took 3 threes a game at most in Indiana. Norm took 3 threes. I kind of
think we can include Precious not as a draft pick. I know they didn't draft him, but like that was a redraft trade, right? Like that was a guy if he was there at 29 when Malachi Flynn was there, they would have taken Precious.
Yes, I agree.
And another guy who took 1 3-point attempt.
No, and Pascal, I don't even think he had any 3-point track record at the time he was drafted. Scotty Barnes wasn't taking a lot of threes at Florida State.
Norm, that was the thing too, was if he can shoot. I remember writing it when we were at the Score. It was like my little draft blurb was like, I actually like a lot here. If he can shoot at all, he's a rotation guy. And then now that's all he does is shoot.
Yeah, well, you know. No, it's interesting because like the Raptors' just history there was very clear. They weren't taking these types of players. But as you mentioned more recently, like Malachi, right? He took 6.4 threes per game out of 13 shots per game. So that's half his shots were threes. You look at Jalen Harris, 6 of 16 were threes. So almost, you know, similar ratio. Even a David Johnson was shooting 4 threes a game against like, you know, 7 2-point shots per game. So those are guys who have like substantial 3-point shooting track records. But generally speaking, like, I think it's fair to say like the Raptors just don't value shooting to the same degree as other teams, which is not to say the Raptors don't value shooting. I just think that like, I've even asked Bobby Webster this question outright, and he said like it's one of like 5 or 6 things that they consider rather than like one or 2 things they consider.
I also think if you were going to write out those 5 or 6 things and you rank them in terms of, well, what is the likelihood we can develop this skill? Well, you can't stretch a guy out more. You can't make his hands bigger. Otherwise, I would have a huge wingspan by now, and I'd have gigantic hands.
Yeah, what's your measurements, man?
It's 5'10" with a 5'11" wingspan, maybe. It's not a lot.
Damn, you and Fred the same, huh?
Yeah, I could trick a team though. I'll be going to the workout, and they'll be like, "Oh, what size shoes are you?" I'll be like 14, and they'll be like, "Ooh, this guy's got. There must be wingspan here. There's growth potential." I'm like, "No,
working on stilettos."
No. I just have clown feet. So
that's true. Actually, you have like size 13 feet.
14, yeah.
14. Wow, okay, all right.
Yeah. So anyway, I think if you lay those things out, it's like, okay, what are the 5 things? The 5 most important things we see in a prospect are wingspan, because that's a proxy for ability to fit our defensive system, shooting, handle, processing speed as a general catch-all for like how well do you read the game and feel the game. And then a big one that I know they try to work on in workouts, and then as they track guys, like I remember it was a big O'Shea thing, is, okay, here's how you look at G League minicamp. How do you take coaching, and do you look better at the combine? And how do you take coaching? And do you look better when we bring you in for a workout? How do you take that coaching? Do you look better at summer league? And that was one of the things that they liked about O'Shea was the progression, step over step in that draft process.
Right.
So you lay those 5 things out, and the last one is kind of wait and see. You can't know that ahead of time. But of the other 4, it's like, well, what can you teach? Can't teach wingspan. If you can teach that processing speed or feel, if you want to call it, it's a pretty, you used the word nebulous earlier. It's like, it's hard to touch, right? It's hard to throw anything at that other than reps, unless you're into the virtual reality game or something like that. Even handle something you can work on, but like some guys, it just never comes for. And then obviously wingspan as that proxy for defensive ability, you can't do that either. You can teach a guy how to use his body better, how to rotate his hips better and things like that, but you can't make up for the size. So you're left with, okay, well, shooting is the one thing that we at least know how to coach a guy on. Stick them in the corner. You tell them to take 1,000 threes every day. And some guys it's going to work for. Some guys will become passable from bad.
Give them the Nick Nurse pill.
Yeah. And look, we joke about the Nick Nurse pill, but
it's not a joke. I've literally seen Nick Nurse walk up to Isak Bonga this year in practice, and he was like, Isak was already doing form shooting with a regular basketball. Nick Nurse walks across the gym, says, hey, hold on, to one of the other trainers who were there. And he was like, and he literally said, yo, here you go, and gave him the Nick Nurse pill. And he said it was probably a little bit deflated, but he's like, yeah. And then he's like, yo, do this instead. And, you know, you can line up the, anyway, this is.
No,
I think that's actually like a part of it. Like, I think Nick is like a big part of their confidence and development.
It is. And we've known for a couple years, they have, at one point it was called a NOAA analytics system that like gives guys real-time feedback on their 3-point shooting. Like you could be in the gym by yourself and there'll be a voice that tells you short, long, right, left when you miss shots. And you can
like a voice of God in the gym, just like
like there's a feedback thing, like a sport view tracker on the nets.
Okay,
and you can get real-time feedback. So yeah, you still need like a trainer there to be rebounding for you and stuff like that. But shooting is also the one thing that there's immediate feedback on. You can't work on defensive stuff and know if you're getting better at it in real time. You can't work on, I mean, you can work on your handle, but until you're against a defender who's actually trying to strip you and stuff, it's a little hard. And you certainly can't work on, you know, your size in any kind of.
You could work on your size.
Yeah, you can get in.
According to Pat Riley.
Yeah, that whole thing. Anyway, so I just think, I think at the top of the draft, shooting is an important skill because every prospect that's getting picked that high should be bringing a lot more to the table already, right?
Yeah,
like you got to have, like Cade Cunningham to be the #1 pick. Part of that was, well, he can already shoot. So his floor is way higher because he's got size and he can shoot. And then if you're later in the draft, you have to punt on something, right? Those guys aren't going to check every box. Do you punt on, okay, well, we're going to get a guy who's a little older and maybe you get a few less years out of him, but those like 4 rookie scale years, he's closer. Or do you punt on shooting because you think that's something you can develop over the course of 4 years? It's like something's got to give in those spots. The Spurs the Spurs at one point were almost like anti-modern in that they had no wings. They were all guards and centers. It's like, okay, well, that's where the advantages were. A lot of teams didn't think those smaller, twitchy international guards could scale to the NBA level. So they leaned into that. And then, you end up with Manu Ginobili, who is one of, the 25 best players in the NBA at the time, coming off the bench for his whole career. But that's what the draft presented to you, picking at the end all the time. So you just have to, the whole point of this and the whole, I think, way to wrap up the Raptors draft philosophy is just like, you have to be agile because you don't have your pick of everyone. Like if they had the #1 pick every year, we could probably figure out that's the Raptors type of guy. That's who they're taking.
Yeah.
But you don't. You're picking through this year like guys every team has already passed on.
Yeah, exactly. Which does make, I guess, more interesting from a coverage perspective because I guess we can play more games with it. The last thing I was going to wrap up on is just the Raptors haven't drafted a player outside of college basketball, despite their reputation, outside of Bruno Caboclo. So did Bruno essentially turn the Raptors off of drafting international guys?
I don't think so because my hottest take about this front office's entire tenure is that the DeAndre Daniels pick was worse than the Bruno one.
Okay.
Bruno, you at least saw what they were going for.
Yes, again,
DeAndre Daniels had a couple good games in the NCAA tournament on top of not a great sample without NBA size.
Was he good in the analytics at least? Maybe.
I can't imagine because he didn't have great numbers at UConn. Like he was just not. I still don't really get what that one was.
Mm-hmm.
It's the front office's first draft. Maybe it's as simple as that. They hadn't really figured out what they wanted to be yet. But like that was a 3-year guy at Connecticut who he averaged 13 points. He shot 41% on threes, but he only shot 3 a game. And he wasn't really that good defensively.
Yeah.
But he had a good tournament.
Interesting. Yeah, the Raptors have generally avoided that kind of type.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess Fred had a great tournament, but Fred was just a great player.
Fred also had 4 years of being good, right?
Yeah.
And I'd imagine Fred's interviews are like his pre-draft interview circuit is probably the stuff of legend around the Raptors offices.
Yeah, everybody has a Fred story about when they first saw Fred and fell in love with Fred.
My favorite is still Kennedy Meeks stories, though. Like they brought him as an undrafted guy for Summer League.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
And he ended up playing a year with the 905 under Stackhouse. And it, first of all, it was the best Summer League ever because him and J. Cole are boys. So J. Cole came to Summer League games. Like J. Cole was doing shows in Vegas at the same time as Summer League. Okay. But he was coming to Summer League games to watch Kennedy Meeks because he's a huge UNC fan. And him and Kennedy Meeks became like friends.
Interesting.
So I'm interviewing this Summer League guy who's like hoping to get a training camp invite at one point. I'm like, were you just talking to J. Cole? And he's like, oh yeah, that's my guy. And then I ask around the Raptors and everyone is like, oh, he is like the most fun guy we've ever had in for a pre-draft. Like he was everyone's favorite dude.
Wow.
It just didn't work out for him on the course. Pretty successful international career, but
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good to know. All right. When we talk about Kennedy Meeks, that's also time to take a break on the show. I'm your host, Will Lou.
I thought we were going to pivot to Scarborough off the J. Cole thing, you know?
Honestly, the less we talk about it, the better it is. Because
Scotty Barnes and Alec Manoah were out there. Now it's real.
No, it's great. Look, listen, they got a lot of celebrities at the game. It's got a lot of attention on the CBL, which is fantastic. And even just having another pro team in Toronto was really cool to see. The reason people come to see it, to see J. Cole and also to see Jalen Harris, that's the part where it's been like, man, it's been tough. I don't know.
I've only watched 2 of the games. Jalen Harris looked really good in one of them and really not good in the other one.
Yeah. So, and then how much have you seen J. Cole? I saw him hit the corner 3. Like, not even on highlights. I was watching it live when it happened. But otherwise, yeah.
He gets the Tybal treatment.
Also, isn't he like, how old is he? He's like 35, 36?
Something like that.
Yeah. Like, were you expecting a 36-year-old amateur player to come in and do more than hit a corner 3? Anyway, whatever.
No, I don't think anyone was expecting much other than I'm
don't know.
honestly surprised.
People sound like they're disappointed. They're like, I can't believe he's coming off the bench. I'm like, what do you mean you can't believe he's coming off the bench?
Yeah, come on. This is a professional league. Like, there are guys on that team that have played in the NBA.
Yeah, exactly. Also, the only player who raps successfully and plays basketball successfully is Miles Bridges. Yeah. But we'll see how much that stays.
The David Stern line.
If you have, we're not going to talk about it here, but if you haven't seen already, just search Miles Bridges on Twitter or something, all right? But anyway, we're going to take a break. I'm your host, Will Lou. You've been listening to The Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. I'm your host, Wayne Lou. I continue to be joined by Blake Murphy, who will be here. So you're going to be here from 2 through 5:30?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was on at 8:30.
Impressive. That's right. You're also on at 8:30 as well. Okay. We're going to quickly look at, because last week I asked you to present 3 players that intrigued you that were also somewhat possible at the 33rd pick.
And what I did instead was throw out like 8 names in different buckets of guys. I didn't complete the assignment as assigned.
I mean, to be fair, I did mismanage the timing of the show. I only left you with like 2 minutes to cover them. That was, it was a little difficult. I mean, look, we had a great discussion about OG Anunoby and trades, so that was actually probably much more topical than, hey, here's some 6'8" guys that I like who can't shoot, which, you know, if I had to summarize that segment, was basically what it is. So anyway, so I decided to return their favor and offer you 2 as well. Starting with Tari Eason, who's another 6'8" guy with great athleticism, 7'1", wingspan, 21-year-old out of LSU. Very athletic, gets downhill, gets the free throw line in part just because he is very athletic, but he can't shoot. However, I think the metrics probably like him a lot. I know something like steals and blocks, which, by the way, 3.2 steals and 1.8 blocks per 40 minutes. I think some of those rates, generally speaking, I mean, I'm not a draft expert. I just see this line repeated a lot about the draft, is that the steals and block rates generally translate well from college to the NBA. It's sort of a projection of sort of like, A, how active you are, B, how effective you are, and also C, like just your ability to potentially read the game as well. Yeah, and when you watch some highlights of the guy, you're like, damn, okay, I could see why he would fit in the Raptors mold. You know, obviously, you would need to train him up offensively a lot.
Well, yeah, you've got to.
Apparently, he's a one-handed player. Doesn't use his left whatsoever. It affects his dribbling, affects his shooting, affects his scoring.
The other thing is he shoots like Chris Boucher, like on threes. Like he has.
Clearly, the Raptors don't mind.
He has the very like elongated kind of. I used to say for Amir Johnson until people started using this nickname for Chris Boucher, but the trebuchet.
Yeah.
So like you got to pull the string back to shoot the cannonball or whatever it is, the trebuchet ball. Yeah, so he has very Boucher-like mechanics, which obviously we know that can lead to some inconsistency and a slower release. It takes you a little while to let it fly. It's semi-encouraging that he hit a couple of them this year.
Yeah, I'm not expecting him to do that.
No.
In the pros, at least definitely not in year 1 or even year 2 even.
No, the big thing with Eason, though, is, well, one, the productivity. Like, he just put up numbers all over the place. Huge steals and points. A lot of the advanced metrics like him for a lot of things. And they're actually not even that down on his three-point shooting because he is a good free throw shooter. And because college three-point samples tend to be very small, a player's free throw shooting can help us expand the sample a little bit. The most important stat actually in projecting three-point percentage in the NBA is just three-point attempts, how often you're shooting. Because generally only good shooters get the leash to shoot, and it shows that you're further along in your development because you're probably self-creating some of those and stuff. But free throw percentage can help us a little bit when it comes to, hey, the three sample is not great. And he's an 80% free throw shooter.
Okay, yeah.
The big thing with Eason, though, is he defends like hell. And if you're talking about guys who are going to defend multiple positions or fit a Raptors scheme, it's him. So I'm going to borrow something here, if you don't mind, from Brian Schroeder, who is at Brian J Draft on Twitter. Awesome draft Twitter guy. He put Eason next to Keegan Murray. Who is going to go maybe top 5 in this draft.
Yeah.
And obviously this is not the most fair way to do things, but it does highlight that Eason is closer to a top 5 prospect than he is further away. Keep in mind, he's also younger than Keegan Murray. Their block rates are more or less the same. Eason's steal rate is twice as high. Assist rates are the same. Eason gets to the free throw line more and is a better free throw shooter. Worse three-point shooter. Doesn't get to the rim quite as much. But both guys, similar rate of shots of their field goals are assisted. Similar in box plus minus. So in terms of like, are you impacting winning? And then their measurements are almost the same.
That's interesting.
Keegan Murray is, Brian kind of concludes his thread here by, I'll quote him instead of paraphrasing. Keegan is more polished and probably closer to being a real self-creator in the NBA right now. But if Tari becomes a 37-ish% shooter, he will basically be like a super version of Jeremy Grant.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting comp given where Jeremy Grant's career has ended up. where he doesn't want to get traded unless it gets traded to a place where he can get 20 points a game. But so yeah, that's kind of again, thank you to Brian. And Brian does some great draft work behind the paywall at Patreon as well. You can go to patreon.com/BrianJNBA. He's an invaluable resource this time of year, along with a number of draft Twitter people. But yeah, Eason getting comps physically and productivity wise, and is younger than Keegan Murray, who's most people have him in the top 5 on their big board.
Yeah, I just having done some research into this, it does feel like it's unlikely that he would last until 33, but someone to keep an eye on for sure.
You also, there's nothing saying you can't trade up or trade in.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, the latest report, I guess from Keith Smith, NBA, he reports talking to teams about the NBA draft. The team that keeps coming up as a natural trade partner for everyone is Oklahoma City, but not for number 2. That seems to be off the table for now. Most teams are looking at number 12, number 30, or number 34, as one put it, quote, they don't have the roster spots for 4 guys. It turns out after many years of tanking and many years of just like trading away very, very good players for future picks, which I think is a generally fine strategy, but yeah, OKC now has like 34, I think, surplus picks, and they clearly have the same size roster as everyone else.
Yeah, 34 picks between 2023 and 2028.
Right.
Which makes this complicated, right? Because if you're the Raptors, what do you have to offer that OKC's interested in? You could throw some extra picks at it.
What are you really doing, man? No, but seriously, like they're not trading for win now players. At least I don't think so. They haven't really pivoted. So like, what literally can you offer them?
No, and like unless they really like Malachi Flynn, but even then you're talking about Malachi Flynn and an unprotected future first for, the number 12 pick, which maybe that's worth it if you expect to be good moving forward.
I doubt OKC. I think there's probably a better deal that beats that.
Yeah,
I gotta think
you would think so.
But in any
unprotected unprotected speaks a lot in
yeah,
basketball.
That's true. I feel like unprotected picks are very rarely moved nowadays too.
Yeah. That's because every time they do get moved, you see something like, "Ooh, the 2027 Lakers unprotected first round pick is the best asset in basketball." It's a big risk.
Honestly, OKC probably trying to. They probably have their eyes on that too. Honestly, OKC probably has enough draft picks to take an entire class of children in grade 6 right now. So yeah, I guess there could be movement within the draft, but assuming the Raptors stay at 33 and they don't acquire their picks, I doubt Tari's still available, but he's definitely someone that fits the Raptors mold. Another guy I really liked was Andrew Nemhard. I've liked him ever since watching him play for Canada at the World Cup. He was the youngest player I think there at the time for the roster, but it's real interesting to see the Raptors. Canada had a very unbalanced roster that year. I think they had like 5 point guards maybe, and the roster is only 12 at that point.
Yeah.
But Andrew, despite being young, despite having so many players who played the same position, he was able to be in the rotation. Nick Nurse obviously coached that team. Nick has a good familiarity with him. He's also spoken highly of him before. Comes from a really good program at Gonzaga. And, honestly, I was a little surprised to see him mocked as low as 58. I think that was just NBA Draft.net, but, who knows? 58 is still like...
I've seen him mocked as high as the Raptors at 33 and then undrafted some places.
Okay, right. So there's a huge range, as you would expect from almost everybody who could potentially be in the second round there. But
so I
like Andrew a lot, man. I think I don't know. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the reasons he was able to play for that Canada team despite all the guards is that he's almost 6'5" and has a 6'6" wingspan. Now, that's only a +1. Sorry to burst your +6 streak there, but that's a big guard. And the Canada basketball team basically trusted him to be kind of like a 1 offensively and a 3 defensively, similar to how the Raptors would use Banton sometimes this year if they didn't like the matchup for him on ball. Nemhard is really, really smart.
Yeah.
He's a really heady player. He has some projection disadvantages going against him, like the wingspan, like the fact that he doesn't get to the free throw line at all, the fact that he's old, he's already 22. When you get to the second round, that kind of stuff doesn't matter as much as can you play.
Yeah, and as we discussed, the Raptors, don't mind some of these things historically.
Yeah. And you're coming from an environment where, you can play. That's a pro-style offense. And Gonzaga guys don't come in and, succeed with 1,000% success, but they generally come in, with an understanding of what a more pro offense looks like. I know the Jalen Suggs year, they did some gimmick stuff with him, but still, you have an idea of what a good offense looks like and the familiarity there. My question with Nemhard wouldn't even be is he a fit at 33. It would be given his wide draft range.
Could you try to get him undrafted or a two-way or something?
Could you do have his agent nudge other teams and be like, look, we won't sign a two-way. This could be complicated. Do the Terrence Davis, Fred VanVleet, Justin Champagnie thing of guide yourself to undrafted free agent. And you got something lined up right away. Harder to do at the 33 pick to pass on a guy than it is at like 46 or 59.
Yeah, I agree.
But I would keep that on the radar.
And you would assume that out of all his preferences, Toronto obviously playing at home would be really big for him.
A system he's already started to get to know.
Right. Familiarity with Nick, obviously having worked with him. And again, like it's not just like, okay, it's not like, okay, what the Canadian reporters want to get Canadian players on the Raptors again. Like, it's not that. I think his profile is really good. Adam Spinella, who's another really good draft guy on Twitter, makes a ton of YouTube videos. I actually don't know how he does all of these videos while also being a coach himself. Also does a lot of great stuff on his Substack, so go subscribe to him as well. But he made this great point that, like, look, you're looking at 5.5 assists per game, under 2 turnovers per game, and 38% shooting from 3. Like, it's just really, really solid stuff that for a guy who, if you're looking at his perspective, is like, well, I get to come home to Toronto, but also do I have a path to play? And it's like, yes, you do have a path to play. The backup point guard position is very much open. Also, just guards positions are period open. Like, we're seeing a coach that in Nick, who outside of this past year, where they haven't had 2 playable point guards, is also willing to play 2 point guards together as well. So,
yeah. he's a good.
I'd be pretty happy if he came.
I think so. And again, you have to be careful with expectations for a second round pick. He's another guy that I'd probably be saying the same thing I was saying with Delano last year of, he can give you backup minutes now, but it's probably best for him long-term to get down to the G League and work on some stuff there. Mostly, just kind of offensive aggression. Like, I could see him being able at the NBA level, but maybe not aggressive enough to attack advantages. Like sure. He is, and this is a credit to him and certainly a credit to his understanding of the environment around him at Gonzaga, but he is like a pass first, pass second guy. Yeah. And that's why the free throw rate's low. He only took 5.5 field goal attempts inside the arc per game. Mm-hmm. He's not going to, as he is right now, not going to pressure the rim a ton just because he's looking to pass first. But
also got a great floater as well.
Yeah. And with his length, you like his ability to, be a decent finisher. It's not like you're talking the Fred VanVleet, Malachi Flynn challenge of you're going to be 5-6 inches smaller than anyone guarding you. Yeah. It's not the same thing. So I like Nemhard. I was wrong on where he was a couple years ago. I thought when he was looking to transfer, he should come out. I thought it would have helped his development more, being in the G League or being in a pro-style environment. I like where he's at.
Yeah,
and
he's done well.
It's hard to separate sometimes the Raptors side and the Canada basketball side, because I do look at Nemhard and it's like, yeah, this is a guy who could factor into that program. Obviously couldn't make the 3-year commitment because he doesn't know where he's going to land in the draft. It's really hard for a rookie to do that. But yeah, I think he's an NBA guy, and if he's not an NBA guy yet, I think he's close.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, super quickly, got like 3 minutes left. So the Utah Jazz continue to force themselves into the news with Quinn Snyder stepping down as head coach. Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer, friend of the program, Kevin O'Canada, Kevin O'Propaganda, also reports that the Raptors have expressed interest in Rudy Gobert, sort of reinforcing what Jake Fisher has already put out there from Bleacher Report. Look, we've already done the Rudy Gobert discussion. I think you and I are both on the case of just the contract's too big. I don't really want it. I don't really want to be left holding the bag. But my other question is, there seems to be a lot of changes in Utah. And I think they still want to be competitive, because it seems like unless Donovan Mitchell asks out, they're going to try everything possible to try to please him. But, could you maybe get a couple pieces from Utah? Is there anyone on Utah that intrigues you if they are open for business? Because I also opened up their Caps page, and this thing looks nasty. But just I'm going to ask you first, is anyone on Utah you like?
Yeah, it's
obviously Donovan Mitchell, but
there are guys on Utah I like, like even Mike Conley, but he's got 2 years left on that deal. I know it's not fully guaranteed the last year, but it's still a tough one. Bogdanovich as an expiring $20 million wouldn't be that bad in theory, but you got to send out the salary to make it work.
What are you trading for?
I don't think Gary Trent for Bogdanovich is the type of move. No. Like you're not there yet.
10 years older, man.
Yeah, you're not in that spot. I do like Royce O'Neal, but you've already built several Royces O'Neal. I don't know.
Yeah, the
that
Raptors specialize in manufacturing Royce O'Neal,
Yeah.
so I guess we're not doing that.
Royce the 6'7". Yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to see. Udoka Azubuike's like an interesting, like, could you get him some 905 time and turn him into something?
Okay.
But he's still on his rookie skill deal. So that's I don't know that anything fits price wise.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, no, looking at the roster, I mean, like, I guess people still want Nikhil. Another example of Canadians wanting Canadians on the team. But
I suppose.
yeah. Well,
Nikhil's got to get better at some of the stuff he was really good at as a rookie.
yeah, fair enough. Utah's a mess, man.
Yeah.
I'm very happy.
Look, the Nikhil move would be, the trade would be, how do we say this? A subtle tamper.
Oh,
that's what you'd be doing.
No, listen,
there.
if you're gonna be a cop for tampering, you gotta have higher ambitions. But look, that does it for us today. I'm your host, Wim Lou, and you've been listening to the Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Make sure you find the Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts, subscribe, and please rate and review our show. Thanks again to our guest, Blake Murphy, our board producer, Derek Brandale, and Jennifer Rowland for helping with the YouTube stream. A reminder, we're off air tomorrow because the Jays are playing a day game, and I will be off the next 2 weeks. Alex will be taking over hosting duties starting Thursday, and then Blake will be carrying you through the week of the draft. So I will talk to you 2 weeks from now.
Have a good trip.